Okay. Uh, Good evening, my dear students and other students who are preparing for the competitive examination and writing for the uh, MA Political Science CB set 2025, and all my students who are studying the first semester of BA Political Science. I welcome you all. So today we are going to discuss about the liberalism, Marxism, and behavioralism. After the completion of this lecture, you would be in a position to understand what would be the liberalism, what is Marxism, and the behavioralism. In a comparative way, you can understand, you will be in a position to understand the three concepts. These are the three philosophical concepts, ideologies are very important to understand the political science in proper way. So let us start with liberalism. So, what is liberalism? Liberalism is a political and philosophical ideology that emphasizes individual rights, freedoms, and the value of rule of law. That means it more focuses on individual rights, freedom, and free market. These are the essence of the liberalism. And the economic liberalism feels says that the support free market. Capitalism, socialism focuses on social justice and equal opportunities. And that's why liberalism has various manifestations across the political spectrum, with classical liberalism prioritizing minimal government interventions, while modern liberalism may endorse a more active role for government in addressing social issues and economic inequalities. This is the main difference. We can see the traditional liberalism and the modern liberalism, which gives the minimal role of the state, interference of the state for the distribution of the resources and reducing the inequality and providing social justice in the society. That's why this is very important aspect. Now, we look at the historical evolution of the liberalism. This is the first one is the classical liberalism, which emerged in the 17th and 18th century. Classical liberalism gives individual liberty, importance to individual liberty, limited government, and free market. The thinkers, especially John Locke, Adam Smith, and Thomas Jefferson, articulated that the core principles of classical liberalism, advocating for the individual rights, constitutionalism, and a laissez-faire economy. This is the main important, which was advocated by the classical liberal thinkers. And the classical liberalism played a significant role in the American and French revolutions, as well as inspiring movements for political and economic reforms across the globe during the 17th and 18th century. However, the modern liberalism in the late 19th century and early 20th century has more give emerged as a response to the social economic problems created by industrialization. That's why the modern liberals and such liberalists like John Stuart Mill and T.H. Green. John Stuart Mill given focus on the liberty, freedom of liberty, and representative government. On his book, on his famous book on liberty, he mainly focused on the liberty of the individual, and T.H. Green focuses on the theory of natural rights. They argued that the government intervention was necessary to address inequality, poverty, and social ills. So they advocated for the social welfare programs, labor regulations, and the progressive taxation, while still upholding the core liberal values of individual liberty and limited government. This is the difference between the classical liberalist and the modern liberalist. That is the basic differences. They did not give in more importance the social justice, but the modern liberalist says that the social justice is very important. That will be advocated and further taken to the people by the just by the intervention of the government, and reducing the inequality and providing the natural resources to distributing natural resources to all people in the society. And however, we have another concept. This was the neoliberalism. That is, in the late 20th century, neoliberalism emerged as a revival of classical liberal ideas, emphasizing deregulation, privatization, and free trade. This is nothing but it is carrying the classical liberalism ideology. Neoliberal policies were implemented in many countries, often with the aim of promoting economic growth and reducing government debt. However, a neoliberalism has also been criticized for exacerbating inequality and undermining the social welfare programs. So that's why many critics they came against they leveled against the neoliberalism. That's why it is taking away the welfarian programs. But in nowadays, we need more welfarian programs as well as the social justice and reducing inequality. It is only possible by the intervention of the government. Minimal intervention is very essential in nowadays situation and condition is concerned. However, we can see that the diverse stance of liberalism. The first one is the libertarianism. Libertarianism is a radical form of liberalism that emphasizes the individual liberty and minimal government intervention in all aspects of life. Libertarians, they advocate for the abolition of most government functions, including social welfare programs, public education, and even national defense also. However, egalitarian liberalist says that the egalitarian liberalism emphasizes the importance of social justice, equality of opportunity. They think argues that the government has a responsibility to address the inequality and ensure the everyone has a fair chance to succeed. That's why they support policies such as progressive taxation, universal health care, and affirmative actions for the well-being of the poor people and the downtrodden sections of the society. That is the second concept. The egalitarian liberalism advocates emphasize mainly on the social justice. However, the cultural liberalism, this is also one of the one concept that cultural liberalism emphasizes individual freedom, tolerance in matters of personal expression, lifestyle, and cultural identity. The cultural liberals advocate for the protection of minority rights, freedom of speech, and the separation of church and state. This is one of the important difference we can find that. And another important is the types of liberalism that we already discussed, that the liberal classical liberalism and the modern liberalism. These are the two forms of government where liberal thoughts are very important. So the social liberalist combines elements of classical and modern liberalism, emphasizing individual freedom as well as the social welfare freedom. Whereas the neoliberalist, the late 20th and 21st century, they represent a resurgence of classical liberal ideas, emphasizing deregulation and privatization and free trade. Thinkers like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman advocated for reducing the size and scope of government and promoting market-based solution to the social and economic problems. That is the difference they advocated. And Here we can see the economical liberalism in this map, in this diagram. We can see the economic liberalism implication. It says that the minimal government intervention into the administration or in the market. However, private property, it says that the economical liberalism advocate the earning of private property, right to private property. And another important, it also supports the competitive market. Competition is very important. They think that when we have the competition in the good, healthy competition in the society, that will gives a quality of production and lesser burden on the consumer or producer or the buyer. And however, the voluntary exchange of property and ideas. This is the liberal economic concept replicates this all this basic important ingredients in that which they were involved in that liberal aspects. However, one more important thing we can see that the laissez-faire concept of the laissez-faire. The laissez-faire in modernism we can say that the laissez-faire what does mean laissez-faire is nothing but a French phrase meaning is that let to let to do or let pause. That means it embodies a central tenet of classical liberalism. That means it advocates for the minimal intervention of the government in the economy, allowing individuals and businessmen to operate freely, free, freely with minimal regulations, tariffs, and subsidies. And this philosophy also stems from the belief that the market driven by supply and demand, that is the most efficient mechanism for allocating resources and fostering economic growth. That means they say that the supply and demand should decide the efficiency of the mechanism in the market, not by the government. That is their main philosophy. That was advocating they're giving importance to the market and supply chain. However, the liberalism has a distinct philosophy and emerged during the 17th and 18th century, although its root can be traced back further. We can see that why liberalism concept has emerged. Why? Because it rose as a challenge to the traditional hierarchies, absolute monarchies, and the dominance of the church in the medieval period. That is the very important, and several factors contributed to it emergence has in the following way. We can study them one by one. One important aspect uh, uh, which given the scope for the emergence of liberalism is that the scientific revolution. That is the scientific revolution enlightened the and the first one and the enlightened scientific revolution also given very logical rationality behind the emergence of the liberalism, classical liberalism. And another one important is that the scientific approach, the emergence of the rationality and scientific approach among the thinkers, that is also given scope for the revolution of the emergence of the concept of liberalism. And the Reformation and the Protestants Reformation, which began in the 16th century, challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and promoted religious individualism. And another important aspect is that the rise of capitalism and the market economy. This is the very important. This is the central point for emergence of the liberalism. So this is very important. And another important is that social political unrest during the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries were marked by the social political unrest, including the revolutions in England, America, and France. These were important aspects. And Another important that the reactions to the absolutism. This is also one of the reason for that purpose. It has emerged the concept direct absolute monarchies that dominated Europe during the early modern period absolutely rules. Okay, they claim to derive their authority from the god and exercised unlimited power over their subjects. That means the liberal thinkers challenged this notion and argued that the government should be limited and accountable to the people. They advocated for the constitutionalism, the rule of law, and the protection of individual rights against the government inclusion. That means the government, the monarch, they should go according to the constitution and the established rule of law, not their individual way or arbitrarily. That is the main. That was that's why the concept of constitutionalism and the concept of limited government has emerged strong base for the emergence of the liberalism. And another important is that the important point is the development of printing and public discourses. This is also one of the intervention of the printing press facilitated the wider spread of new ideas and information, contributing to the growth of public discourses and political debates. However, we can see the now we see the core principles of liberalism. They include the individualism that emphasizes importance of the individualism and the individual rights, and the liberty is also one of the important core principle of the liberalism. That is the protection of individual freedom, including freedom of speech, religion, and association. And another important point is that equality, belief in the equal worth and dignity of all individuals, regardless of their social status, race, and gender. And another important principle is the limited government. It was advocated by the John Locke. Says that the limited government within the limited power, that means they constrained by a constitution and the rule of law. They cannot do administration according to their will. They have to go according to the constitution. They have to act according to the rule of law. They have to go the established law instead of individual arbitrary powers. And another important is fourth principle is that the rule of law. This is the very important principle that everyone that meaning including the government officials are subjected to the rule of law. That means all are equal in the eyes of law. Nobody is above the law. That is the main concept, the rule of law. And after our independence, the drafting committee of Indian Constitution also borrowed the rule of law concept from the England. And the another important is the constitutionalism, the idea that constitutionalism should be, that means the government should be based on a written constitution that defines its powers and limitations. This is very basic and central point for the core principle of the liberalism. It reduces the absolute power which is exercised by the monarchs or the governments. And tolerance, this is also one of the important principles that diverse beliefs and lifestyles are very important in any society. And another important is private property. It supports the protection of the right to own and control their own property. That's why the one of the advocate, the champion of the liberalism is that the John Locke. He advocated the right to property, right to life, and another one, three principles he advocated. And another important, last but not least, that is the free market. The liberalism supports for a market economy with minimal intervention of the government. These are the main basic core principle of liberalism. And we can see this is the difference between the liberalism and Marxism. It gives the market oriented market forces important, the market and freedom and individual rights. But the Marxism differs that political ideology, that theory that brought by Karl Marx is said that the capitalism and the social structure. It emphasized that the structure based on the economy activities. According to him, economy is one of the main requirement for the human to satisfy their needs. And the class struggle. And this is the important concept regarding the liberalism. So in the upcoming next class, we will continue with the Marxism and the behavioralism. Thank you one and all for your keen listening. Thank you for your support and encouragement.